In almost 60 years of Star Trek, this Voyager episode scared me more than any other. In almost 60 years of Star Trek, one episode of Star Trek Voyager scared me more than any other. Star Trek Voyager seems like the least likely of all the Star Trek shows to harbor the franchise's scariest episode, and yet the premise of Star Trek Voyager is inherently frightening when examined closely. The USS Voyager gets flung 70,000 light-years into the bleak expanse of the unknown on its maiden voyage. In the Delta Quadrant, resources are low, Federation allies are nowhere in sight, and barring a few exceptions, the only remotely familiar alien species is the Borg. In Star Trek Voyager Season 4, Episode 25-1, a lengthy trip through a radioactive nebula requires most of the USS Voyager crew to spend months in stasis. Only the holographic Dr. Robert Picardo and ex-Borg 7 of 9, Jerry Ryan, are exempt and keep the starship running. Everything seems to run smoothly as 7 monitors the crew and makes routine repairs. But visiting trader Low-Taric, Wade Williams, quickly becomes a threat. When scans reveal Low-Taric isn't real and the doctor's program fizzles out, 7 must confront the maddening isolation of being truly alone. Star Trek Voyager's 1 is the franchise's most frightening episode. As my pick for Star Trek's most frightening episode, Star Trek Voyager Season 4, Episode 25-1, neatly captures the feeling of horrific isolation and helplessness that Voyager's premise initially promised. When things go awry, 7 of 9's belief that she's stronger than her fear of isolation is challenged and proven wrong. The metaphorical walls close in, and the sense of dread amplifies. Low-Taric poses the double threat of being sexually creepy and violently prejudiced against Borg. After losing the Doctor, 7 starts hallucinating the crew dying gruesomely, the Borg returning, and everything being her own fault. 7 of 9's fears of loss are thrown into stark relief against her isolation, calling to mind all the fear and uncertainty that I felt during the pandemic. After losing one collective, 7 intentionally separates herself from the USS Voyager's crew, only to experience increasing helplessness and panic. 7's fear of losing her new collective feels very real. 1 is a story about how isolation and loneliness can manifest and amplify our worst fears, especially fear of the unknown. There are few things scarier to me than my fears seeming true, as the case is for 7 of 9 and 1. Why Star Trek's darker episodes typically work so well. Star Trek's darker episodes typically work so well because they provide a striking contrast to Gene Roddenberry's vision of optimism that Star Trek is celebrated for. There has to be tension and resolution in dynamic, thoughtful storytelling, and Star Trek achieves success by developing a whole range of tones. Star Trek Discovery, for example, pulls its whole series arc out of Captain Gabriel Lorca's, Jason Isaacs' oppressive shadows and into Captain Michael Burnham's, Sonequa Martin Green, steadfast hope. Star Trek Deep Space Nine is unquestionably dark, yet its shining moments stand out as some of Star Trek's brightest. Unlike Star Trek horror episodes that are more universal, Star Trek Voyager's 1 successfully portrays relatively realistic fears of isolation, panic, and the unknown. The feeling of losing control hits home far more than any Borg or Gorn attacks in more objectively scary Star Trek episodes. My own thoughts whispered like Low-Taric that I may not be strong enough to get through my own metaphorical radioactive nebula. I've desperately scrambled to manage what feels like increasingly impossible tasks. In the end, Star Trek Voyager remains reliably comfortable and suggests maybe, like 7, I can trust those around me to help. For decades, Star Trek has boldly gone where no series has gone before, tackling complex philosophical dilemmas, scientific quandaries, and moral challenges. Yet, amidst its hopeful vision of the future, the franchise occasionally dips into outright horror. As a lifelong Trekkie, I've witnessed many unsettling moments, ominous Borg cubes looming over the Enterprise, mind-controlling parasites, and even the body horror of assimilation. But none of these hold a candle to the sheer visceral terror I felt during Star Trek Voyager's episode The Thaw, Season 2, Episode 23. The Thaw isn't your typical Star Trek adventure. Instead of charting nebulae or outwitting alien adversaries, it plunges the crew into a waking nightmare, a surreal and psychological horror story where fear itself is the villain. When Captain Janeway and her crew discover a planet devastated by environmental collapse, they come across a group of survivors in cryogenic stasis. The catch: These individuals are connected to a virtual reality simulation designed to keep their minds active. This isn't the escapist paradise you might expect. Instead, the program has spiraled out of control, hijacked by an embodiment of fear, a maniacal, clown-like figure played with unnerving brilliance by Michael McKean. The episode's concept, a computer-generated nightmare that feeds off the very terror it induces, sets the stage for an exploration of fear so chilling that even the confidence of Voyager's resourceful crew feels fragile. What makes The Thaw terrifying isn't just its premise, but its execution. The virtual reality world is a distorted carnival of garish colors, absurd performances, and omnipresent dread. Fear is unpredictable, taunting its victims with moments of levity before plunging them into despair. McKean's portrayal of fear is particularly disarming. His exaggerated theatrics and mocking humor amplify the discomfort, creating an antagonist who feels inescapably intimate. It's not just what fear says, it's the way he seems to know exactly how to get under your skin. In one of the episode's most disturbing scenes, Fear executes a captive victim in front of the crew. There's no elaborate special effect, no dramatic music cue, just a cold, clinical termination that leaves the remaining survivors in quiet despair. This moment shocked me because it underscored Fear's omnipotence within its realm. Unlike a Klingon warrior or Romulan schemer, you can't reason with Fear. It's not just a character, it's a force of nature, relentless and all-encompassing. The psychological underpinnings of The Thaw make it uniquely horrifying in the Star Trek canon. Fear thrives on uncertainty, vulnerability, and anticipation. The virtual reality world amplifies these feelings, trapping the crew in a liminal space where the usual rules don't apply. The omnipresent carnival music, disjointed imagery, and erratic behavior of Fear's minions evoke the disorienting atmosphere of a nightmare you can't wake up from. Watching it, I felt a gnawing sense of unease, as though the boundaries of reality itself were fraying. But the terror isn't limited to the virtual environment. The implications of The Thaw extend beyond the screen, forcing the audience to confront their relationship with fear. What would you do if your greatest anxieties became sentient? Could you outsmart your own terror, or would it consume you? For me, these questions lingered long after the credits rolled. The idea that fear could grow stronger the more you resist it, that your own mind could betray you, felt profoundly unsettling. What elevates The Thaw beyond simple horror is the way it ultimately resolves this conflict. Captain Janeway, ever the unflinching leader, confronts fear head-on. She doesn't try to overpower him. Instead, she outsmarts him, playing to his ego and exploiting his overconfidence. Her iconic line, "I've known fear. It's a very healthy thing most of the time. You run away, you fight, but you never let it in," resonated deeply. It's a reminder that fear, no matter how powerful, is a construct, a survival mechanism that can be understood and mastered. The final moments where Fear realizes he's been defeated are haunting. His bravado collapses into childlike vulnerability, and as he fades into oblivion, he whispers, "I'm afraid." It's a poignant end that reframes Fear not as an invincible monster, but as something inherently human. In almost 60 years of Star Trek, there have been countless episodes that explore humanity's darker side. But The Thaw stands out because it taps into a universal truth. Fear is both our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. It can paralyze us, but it can also motivate us to act. This duality is what makes the episode so chilling and so unforgettable.